I never expected to stand up at my parents' Thanksgiving dinner and reveal that I owned their mortgage. The words tumbled out of my mouth as the pumpkin pie sat half-eaten on the table. You can disown me if you want, but you should know that Horizon Financial bought your $800,000 mortgage last year. I'm your lender. My father's face drained of color as the gravy boat clattered against his plate. My mother froze with her wine glass suspended midair. 20 years of conditional love and financial manipulation had finally reached its breaking point in their pristine Lake Oswego dining room. The silence that followed felt like an eternity, as every family member turned to stare at my father, whose smug superiority had instantly evaporated. After years of enduring his dismissal of my career choices while they secretly struggled with mounting debt, something inside me finally snapped. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Chen, and for 32 years I tried to earn the approval of parents who measured success in very specific ways. Growing up in Portland as the daughter of first-generation Chinese-American parents, expectations were clearly defined from the beginning. My father, Harold Chen, had built a moderately successful medical supplies import business through what he described as real work and traditional values. My mother, Margaret, maintained their social standing in the community while reinforcing my father's vision of an acceptable life path. That path did not include my passion for finance and investment. Business is unpredictable, my father would say during my high school years. Medicine and law are the only respectable professions for someone with your advantages. He would gesture around our comfortable suburban home as if its very walls were evidence of his superior judgment. I was the perfect daughter throughout high school. Straight A's, classical piano, volunteer work carefully selected to enhance college applications. I dutifully applied to pre-med programs to please my parents, hiding the finance books I devoured in private. When I received a full scholarship to Stanford's business program instead, the first fracture in our relationship appeared. We didn't work this hard for you to become a glorified accountant, my father said, the disappointment evident in his voice. Investment bankers are just gamblers in expensive suits. Despite their disapproval, I accepted the scholarship, my first real act of defiance. The next 4 years were a delicate balance of excelling academically while enduring stilted weekend phone calls, filled with not-so-subtle hints about transferring to pre-med. Every holiday visit included introductions to the children of my parents, friends who were in medical school, their achievements highlighted in ways designed to make my choices seem inadequate. David's son just got accepted to Johns Hopkins Medical, my mother would say, serving me slightly smaller portions than everyone else at dinner. A subtle but unmistakable sign of her disappointment. He'll be set for life with real security. The summer after graduation, I landed an internship at Goldman Sachs. Instead of pride, my announcement was met with concerned glances between my parents. "How temporary is this detour?" my father asked, as if my degree and career aspirations were simply a phase to be outgrown. That same summer, I met Michael Parker at a rooftop networking event in San Francisco. He was charming, ambitious, and worked for a biotech venture capital firm, a career my parents might actually approve of. Our relationship progressed quickly, and for the first time, I felt I might be able to balance my professional dreams with my parents' expectations. Michael understood ambition and drive, and he seemed to appreciate my insights about markets and investments. When I brought Michael home to meet my family 6 months later, my parents were visibly relieved. Here was proof I could make at least one acceptable life choice. "Biotech investing is practically medicine," my father declared, clapping Michael on the shoulder. "You're pulling our daughter into a respectable field." I smiled tightly, noting how quickly my father assumed Michael's influence would redirect my career rather than the other way around. For 2 years, I built my reputation at the firm while my relationship with Michael deepened. When he proposed with a ring far more extravagant than a third-year analyst could typically afford, I suspected parental involvement, confirmed when my mother later let slip that they had helped Michael choose something worthy of a Chen. The implication was clear. I might have chosen an unconventional path, but my parents were still orchestrating what they considered a proper life. The wedding planning became a battleground of expectations. My mother insisted on a 300-person gala at Portland's most exclusive venue, dismissing my preference for something intimate as embarrassingly small time. My father repeatedly pulled Michael aside for man-to-man conversations about future career moves that would make him truly successful. 3 months before the wedding, I received an unexpected opportunity, a chance to join a boutique wealth management firm in Portland as a junior partner. The position offered creative freedom and equity that the larger corporate structure couldn't match. Excitedly, I shared the news with Michael over dinner at our favorite restaurant. "You'd be giving up Goldman for some tiny local shop?" His disbelief mirrored my parents' perspective so perfectly that it gave me pause. "Your father mentioned he's concerned about your career decisions. This would confirm he's right to worry." "My father discussed my career with you?" "Behind my back?" I put down my fork, appetite gone. Michael shrugged. "He cares about your future. We both do. This small firm detour won't lead anywhere impressive. You're better than that." That night revealed the truth I'd been avoiding. Michael hadn't fallen in love with me. He'd fallen in love with a version of me that aligned with my parents' expectations. The realization was both devastating and strangely liberating. The next morning, I returned the ring and accepted the position at Horizon Wealth Management. The fallout was swift and merciless. My parents refused to believe I had ended the engagement, insisting Michael must have recognized my self-sabotaging tendencies. When I moved back to Portland for the new position, they declined to help with the relocation, a stark contrast to their eagerness to assist my older brother James when he moved home after medical school. "Investment advice is just guesswork," my father said during an uncomfortable dinner at their home the week I returned to Portland. "People with real skills, surgeons like your brother, don't need to gamble with other people's money to earn respect." James shot me an apologetic look across the table. Unlike our parents, he had always supported my choices, even when they differed from the prescribed path. "Emma has amazing financial instincts," he interjected. "Her portfolio outperforms most professional managers." My father waved away the comment. "Lucky streaks don't last. Real success comes from disciplines proven over generations." Despite their disapproval, I threw myself into building my client base at Horizon. My approach differed from traditional wealth management. I focused on financial literacy and sustainable investing, particularly for women and first-generation professionals, who, like me, were navigating success without a roadmap. Within 2 years, my client retention rate was the highest in the firm, and my portfolio performance consistently ranked in the top quartile. While my professional life flourished, family gatherings became increasingly strained. Each achievement I shared was met with qualified acknowledgement. "Yes, but is it stable? That's nice, but when will you manage truly significant assets?" The implied comparison to James's medical career was always present, though he consistently tried to deflect their criticism. The turning point in my relationship with my parents came during a Sunday dinner 3 years after I joined Horizon. My father had been unusually quiet throughout the meal, and my mother seemed tense, her usually perfect hostess demeanor slipping to reveal genuine anxiety. "We've had some business setbacks," my father finally admitted as my mother served dessert, with trembling hands. "Nothing serious, but we may need to make some adjustments." Later, as I helped clear the dishes, my mother revealed more. "Your father's company has cash flow problems. The new import regulations hit us hard, and the house payments have become challenging." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We may need to sell and downsize, but your father can't bear the thought. This house represents everything he's worked for." The vulnerability in her admission shocked me. My parents had always projected absolute financial security. It was the foundation of their authority, the justification for dictating what constituted responsible life choices. Learning they were struggling triggered an unexpected protective instinct in me, despite years of their criticism. "Let me look at your finances," I offered. "No obligations, but maybe I can suggest some restructuring options." My mother glanced toward the living room where my father sat with James. He would never accept financial advice from... She caught herself. "From his daughter?" I finished for her. "From someone in my profession?" She nodded, embarrassed, but not contradicting me. "Then don't tell him," I suggested. "Just get me copies of your statements. Say you're organizing paperwork." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 2 weeks later, I had a clear picture of my parents' financial situation, and it was far worse than they had implied. My father's business had been losing money for nearly 5 years. They had refinanced their house twice, taking on an adjustable rate mortgage with terms that could only be described as predatory. Credit card debt had accumulated across 6 different cards. They were 3 months behind on property taxes. The house that had been the showcase for my father's success, the physical manifestation of the values he had tried to impose on me, was teetering on the edge of foreclosure. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. The career path he had dismissed as gambling had given me the expertise to recognize just how dire their circumstances were. I created a detailed financial rescue plan, including negotiation strategies for their creditors and a potential mortgage restructuring that could save their home. When I presented it to my mother, she reviewed it with wide eyes. "This is remarkably thorough, but your father doesn't need to know I created it," I assured her. "Tell him you spoke with a financial advisor at your bank. The important thing is implementing these steps before the situation deteriorates further." For the next 6 months, I guided my mother through financial triage from behind the scenes. I helped her negotiate payment plans, consolidate debt, and approach lenders with hardship considerations. I even used my professional connections to help my father secure new suppliers with more favorable terms, all without his knowledge of my involvement. Meanwhile, at Horizon, an unexpected opportunity emerged. The firm had begun acquiring distressed mortgage packages from banks looking to offload riskier loans. As a partner, I had input on which packages we pursued. When a portfolio that included loans from my parents' neighborhood became available, I reviewed the details carefully. There, in the middle of the spreadsheet, was their address. Their mortgage had been sold to a debt servicer who was now offering it at a significant discount, along with 20 other troubled loans. The package wasn't particularly attractive from an investment standpoint, except for my personal knowledge of one specific property. After careful consideration and consultation with Olivia, my business partner who knew my family situation, I made a decision. Horizon purchased the mortgage package, with me personally taking additional equity in the company to cover part of the acquisition. The firm had no particular interest in becoming long-term mortgage holders. The plan was to restructure the loans and sell them once they were performing better. But I had a different vision for one particular mortgage. I became my parents' lender without their knowledge. Through careful maneuvering and some help from my brother James, the only family member I trusted with this information, I ensured that the payment accommodation my mother had negotiated with the bank actually came through my firm. The reduced interest rate and extended terms that were generously offered by the lender were my terms, designed to keep them in their home without damaging my father's pride. For over a year, this arrangement continued smoothly. My parents' financial situation gradually stabilized, thanks largely to my behind-the-scenes management. My father even began acknowledging my career with slightly less condescension, though he attributed their financial recovery entirely to his own business, acumen and conservative financial principles, the very principles that had led them to the brink of bankruptcy. "Slow and steady traditional business always weathers the storm," he declared during one family dinner, as I suppressed the urge to mention that his storm had nearly washed away everything he owned. These get-rich-quick investment schemes eventually collapse. Real security comes from tangible businesses, not moving money around on computers. I nodded and ate my dessert, calculating exactly how much interest I had personally saved him that month through the mortgage terms I'd engineered. As their financial pressure eased, my parents returned to their pattern of subtle disapproval regarding my personal and professional choices. My promotion to senior partner at Horizon was acknowledged with, "That's nice, but such small firms are so vulnerable to market fluctuations." My volunteer work teaching financial literacy at the BAO Community Center was dismissed as resume padding. When I began dating David, an architectural engineer who designed sustainable, affordable housing, my mother's primary concern was whether his career had long-term earnings potential. Through it all, I maintained my secret role as their financial safety net, telling myself I was demonstrating the filial piety they had instilled in me, even if they couldn't recognize it. The arrangement might have continued indefinitely if not for Thanksgiving dinner last year, the night everything finally unraveled. I arrived at my parents' home with David, who was meeting my extended family for the first time. My mother had specifically requested I bring him, which I took as a positive sign. Perhaps they were finally accepting my life choices. James and his wife had driven up from Eugene with their 2 children, and a few family friends rounded out the gathering. The evening began pleasantly enough. My father even complimented David's work on a recent downtown redevelopment project. My mother served her traditional Thanksgiving spread alongside Chinese dishes that reflected our heritage, a multicultural feast that had been our family tradition for decades. As we finished the main course, my father stood to make his annual Thanksgiving toast, crystal glass raised high. Today, we give thanks for family, for tradition, and for success earned through discipline and conventional wisdom. He smiled at James. We're proud to announce that James has been named Chief of Surgery at Eugene Memorial, the youngest doctor to achieve this position in the hospital's history. Applause circulated around the table. I clapped sincerely, genuinely proud of my brother's accomplishment. "This is what comes from following the established path," my father continued. "From respecting parental guidance and choosing a profession with real value. Medicine, law, engineering, these are fields with substance." His gaze shifted to me, then to David beside me. Not everyone chooses wisdom, unfortunately. Some prefer to chase trends or embrace careers based on financial speculation rather than creation. He sighed dramatically. As parents, we can only guide, not force. We must accept disappointment with grace. The table fell uncomfortably silent. James stared at his plate. David tensed beside me. "In recognition of James's achievement and his commitment to family values, your mother and I are establishing a trust fund for his children's education. We've also decided to update our will to reflect our family priorities." My mother nodded, supportively as my father continued. "We've always been clear about rewarding responsibility and traditional success. James will inherit the family home and business holdings. For Emma..." He paused, his expression a mixture of resignation and reproach. "We've set aside a smaller consideration, reflective of the choices she's made." The meaning was unmistakable. I was being formally devalued in the family hierarchy. My worth literally assessed as less because I had chosen my own path. After years of condescension and criticism, they were making their disappointment official, codifying it in legal documents for posterity. David's hand found mine under the table as my father concluded his speech with a final twist of the knife. "Perhaps this will help Emma recognize the importance of stable, traditional career paths before she makes further impulsive decisions regarding her future with David." The room spun slightly as his words registered. They were using their will as leverage to pressure me into leaving a career I loved and possibly influencing my relationship with David. After everything. After I had literally saved their home. While allowing my father to believe he had fixed the problem himself, they were still trying to force me into their predefined box. 20 years of suppressed responses, of swallowing corrections when my father mischaracterized my profession, of accepting backhanded compliments and qualified acknowledgement, all came rushing to the surface. The careful compartmentalization between my professional expertise and my role as dutiful daughter collapsed. I stood up, my napkin falling unnoticed to the floor. I think I should clarify something about stability and financial wisdom. My mother's eyes widened in alarm. James gave me a warning look that clearly communicated, "Not here, not now." But 3 decades of silence had reached their breaking point. "When you nearly lost this house last year, it wasn't your conservative financial principles that saved it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It was me. Those accommodations from your understanding lender came through my firm. The restructured payment plan was my design." My father's face flushed. "What are you talking about? I handled our temporary cash flow issue myself." "You were 3 weeks from foreclosure," I corrected him. "Your temporary issue was $147,000 in credit card debt and a predatory mortgage you shouldn't have signed." My mother pressed her hand to her chest. "Emma, please." "I never planned to mention this," I continued, "but I won't sit here and be publicly devalued while you rewrite financial history. The career path you've dismissed for years is the reason you still own this house." My father's expression hardened into familiar dismissal. "You might have offered some paperwork assistance to your mother, but—" "Horizon Financial bought your mortgage last year," I interrupted. "The loan accommodation wasn't charity from the bank. It was my terms, structured through my firm. I'm your lender." The silence that followed was absolute. My father's face drained of color as the implications sank in. The home that represented his success, the physical embodiment of the life path he insisted was superior, legally belonged to the daughter whose career choices he had belittled for decades. "That's impossible," he finally managed. "You couldn't possibly. Your little investment job doesn't—" "My little investment job made me a millionaire by 30, I said quietly. "While you were lecturing me about financial security, I was building a portfolio that outperformed the market by 23% 3 years running." I took a deep breath, suddenly aware of every eye at the table fixed on me. "I never wanted power over you. I just wanted your respect. But if you're going to write me out of the family for choosing my own path, you should at least understand what that path has actually produced." My father's hands trembled slightly as he set down his wine glass. "If this is true, if you've been manipulating our finances behind my back, then you've betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way." "I saved your home," I corrected him, "and kept your pride intact by letting you believe you'd fix the problem. That wasn't manipulation. It was respect." He shook his head, expression hardening. "No daughter who respected her father would undermine him this way. If what you're saying is true, then perhaps our estate decisions reflect a more accurate assessment of your character than we realized." The finality in his tone made his meaning clear. By revealing the truth, I had confirmed their decision to diminish my place in the family. My father was effectively disowning me. Not legally, perhaps, but emotionally, definitively. I looked around the table at the shocked faces of relatives and family friends who had witnessed my father's cutting dismissal of my career and life choices for years, always with polite smiles and uncomfortable silence. Their discomfort with the open conflict was palpable, but not one person contradicted my father's harsh judgment. No one except David, who quietly stood beside me, his hand steady on my shoulder. "Mr. Chen, your daughter has built something remarkable, both her career and her character. I'm honored to know her, and anyone who truly understands finance would be impressed by what she's accomplished." My father would not meet his eyes. My mother stared at her half-eaten pumpkin pie, tears threatening. Only James spoke up from across the table. "Dad, Emma's been trying to tell you for years how successful she's become. Maybe it's time to listen." But my father had already turned away, his back a physical representation of the emotional wall between us. "I think it would be best if you left now," my mother said quietly. This is not how family behaves." David and I gathered our things in silence. As we reached the door, I turned back one last time. "I never intended to use your mortgage as leverage. That's the difference between us. You see money as power to control others' choices. I see it as a tool to create security and freedom." I walked out of my childhood home with a strange mixture of devastation and liberation. The pretense was finally over. The decades of seeking approval while compromising my authentic self had come to a definitive end. As painful as the rupture was, it also felt like shedding a weight I'd carried for as long as I could remember. In the car, David drove in supportive silence for several minutes before asking, "Are you okay?" I watched my parents' house recede in the side mirror, the place where I had learned both what I wanted and what I refused to become. "No," I answered, honestly. "But I think I will be." What I couldn't have known then, sitting in the passenger seat with tears streaming down my face, was that the painful Thanksgiving revelation would ultimately lead to the most authentic chapter of my life. One, where I finally stopped seeking external validation and fully embraced both my professional power and my personal truth. But the journey from that broken holiday dinner to genuine wholeness would take unexpected turns that even my financial forecasting skills couldn't have predicted. The days following Thanksgiving unfolded in a haze of emotional aftershocks. I threw myself into work at Horizon, grateful for the year-end portfolio reviews that demanded my complete attention. David checked in daily with quiet support, never pressuring me to process the family rupture before I was ready. "I'm here whenever you want to talk about it," he'd say, leaving space for my complicated grief. A week passed with no contact from my parents. My calls went unanswered, my texts unread. Only James maintained communication, calling from his car during his commute to the hospital. "They're still in shock," he explained during one such call. "Dad keeps insisting you must have manipulated financial records to make it look like you own their mortgage." "Is that what he needs to believe?" I asked, staring out my office window at Portland's persistent December rain. "For now, maybe. His entire identity is built around being the family provider and financial authority. The fact that you not only succeeded without following his blueprint, but actually rescued them from his mistakes. It's a complete collapse of his self-narrative." I sighed, watching raindrops race down the glass. "I never wanted to humiliate him, James. I just couldn't listen to another lecture about my irresponsible career while he was rewriting the history of his own financial disaster." "I know," James said softly. "For what it's worth, I tried talking to them again last night. Reminded them how you've built a 7-figure business while still making time to teach financial literacy at the community center. How you've helped dozens of immigrant families establish generational wealth. Let me guess. Dad said something about real professions requiring advanced degrees and Mom worried about my biological clock?" James's knowing chuckle confirmed my prediction. "Something like that. But Emma, they're not the arbiters of success. They think they are. Dad's business has been struggling for years. The pandemic supply chain issues hit him harder than he admits." I traced a raindrop's path with my finger. "I know his balance sheet better than he does. The business is technically insolvent. They're living on home equity and declining credit." "Which makes their judgment of your career even more absurd," James pointed out. After hanging up, I sat with the painful recognition that my parents might never acknowledge the validity of my choices. The emotional distance might be permanent. While I had prepared financial contingency plans for countless clients, I had no roadmap for navigating this personal severance. Olivia appeared in my doorway, her expression unusually tentative. My business partner wasn't known for emotional delicacy. Her direct approach was what made us an effective team. She could deliver hard financial truths while I crafted the more nuanced client relationships. "You've been staring at that raindrop for 10 minutes, she observed, closing my office door. "Either you've discovered meditation or you're still processing Thanksgiving." I attempted a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Just contemplating the fiscal advantages of permanent family estrangement. Think of all the money I'll save on holiday gifts." Olivia didn't laugh. Instead, she sat in the client chair across from my desk, her typical energetic efficiency replaced by something gentler. "Emma, I've been giving this a lot of thought, and I need to say something as your friend and business partner." I braced myself. "Go ahead. What's happening with your parents' mortgage is a conflict of interest we need to address. The personal connection complicated what should have been a straightforward business transaction." My defensive response was immediate. I disclosed my relationship when we acquired the loan package. The ethics committee approved it because you were transparent about the potential conflict," Olivia interjected. "But that was before the Thanksgiving blow-up, before your parents knew you held their mortgage." She wasn't wrong. The dynamic had fundamentally changed. What had begun as a quiet intervention to help my family while preserving my father's dignity had transformed into something more complicated once the truth emerged. "What are you suggesting?" I asked, already anticipating her answer. "We need to transfer their mortgage to a neutral third party. Keep it in our portfolio but remove you from direct oversight. It's the only way to ensure both your professional integrity and your personal boundaries remain intact." Her suggestion made perfect business sense, yet I found myself strangely reluctant. The mortgage represented my last tangible connection to my parents. Relinquishing it felt like surrendering the only leverage I had in a relationship where I'd always been powerless. "They're still my parents," I said quietly. "Despite everything." Olivia leaned forward. "Exactly why you need distance from their financial matters. Emma, you've spent your entire career helping people establish healthy financial boundaries. You teach clients to separate emotional decisions from financial ones. Now you need to apply those principles to your own situation." She was echoing advice I'd given countless times in the sleek conference room down the hall. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I'll think about it," I promised, knowing she was right, but not quite ready to implement the obvious solution. That evening, I returned to my downtown condo to find David preparing dinner in my kitchen, jazz playing softly as he chopped vegetables with practiced precision. The domesticity of the scene, so normal, so warm, made my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Hope you don't mind," he said, looking up. "Thought you could use a home-cooked meal after this week." I dropped my bag and coat, moved by his intuitive understanding of exactly what I needed. "It's perfect. Thank you." Over dinner, I shared Olivia's concerns about the mortgage situation. David listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about the professional considerations without immediately jumping to solutions, a quality I'd grown to appreciate in our relationship. "What's holding you back from transferring oversight?" he finally asked. "It seems like a straightforward professional decision." I pushed a piece of broccoli around my plate, considering his question. "Honestly, it feels like losing the last bit of connection to my family, as if I'm officially accepting the estrangement." David reached across the table for my hand. "The mortgage isn't your connection to your family, Emma. It's a financial instrument. The real connections, the ones worth preserving, exist independently of any business arrangement." His words resonated with wisdom I'd often shared with clients, but struggled to apply to my own life. How many times had I guided others through distinguishing between financial entanglements and genuine relationships? Yet here I was, conflating a mortgage with family bonds. "You're right," I admitted. "I'll talk to Olivia tomorrow about the transfer." Later, as we sat on my balcony with glasses of wine despite the December chill, David brought up something I'd been avoiding. Have you thought about what happens with your parents' mortgage if the transferred oversight reveals issues with their payments? I pulled my sweater tighter around me. Their payments are consistently late, but eventually made. The accommodations I arranged are more generous than industry standard. Under neutral oversight, I didn't finish the sentence. We both knew that without my personal intervention, my parents might face more stringent terms or even default consequences. The preferential treatment I'd arranged wouldn't necessarily continue under objective management. Would you be okay with that outcome? David asked gently. If the business made decisions about their loan based solely on the numbers? The question cut to the heart of my conflict. I don't know, I answered honestly. Part of me thinks they need to face financial reality without my safety net. Another part still wants to protect them, despite everything. David didn't offer an immediate opinion, which I appreciated. Instead, he asked a more fundamental question. What would you advise a client in your position? I closed my eyes, imagining one of the women who came to my financial empowerment workshops facing a similar situation. The answer emerged with clarity. I'd tell her that financial rescues without accountability create dependency, not growth. That continuing to secretly manage her parents' finances while they devalue her accomplishments reinforces an unhealthy dynamic. And what about the guilt? David pressed. The cultural expectation of filial responsibility? This touched the deeper current running beneath my conflict. The tension between my Chinese-American upbringing with its emphasis on family obligation and my individual journey towards self-determination. I'd tell her that honoring one's parents doesn't require sacrificing authenticity or accepting disrespect, I said slowly. That filial piety in its healthiest form is reciprocal, not one-sided subordination. David nodded. Sounds like good advice. Easier to give than follow, I acknowledged with a rueful smile. The next morning, I met with Olivia and our compliance officer to initiate the transfer of oversight for my parents' mortgage. The process was straightforward. A simple matter of paperwork and signatures removing me from direct involvement while maintaining the loan in our portfolio. The technical simplicity belied the emotional complexity of what felt like a symbolic severance. As December progressed, the absence of family holiday traditions left a void I filled with increased community involvement. I expanded my volunteer hours at the Financial Literacy Center, working particularly with immigrant families navigating complex systems without generational knowledge to guide them. Many of their struggles echoed my parents' early years in America, though I now recognized how my father's pride had often prevented him from seeking the very guidance these families gratefully received. 2 weeks before Christmas, I received an unexpected call from my mother. Seeing her name on my phone screen sent my heart racing with a confusing mixture of hope and apprehension. "Emma?" she began without preamble, her voice tight with what might have been distress or simply discomfort. "We received a formal notice about our mortgage being transferred to different oversight within your company." I closed my office door for privacy. Yes, it was necessary to address potential conflicts of interest after Thanksgiving. A pause stretched between us. "Your father is concerned about what this means for our payment arrangement. Not, we miss you, or let's talk about what happened. Just practical concerns about the financial implications of our ruptured relationship." The disappointment shouldn't have surprised me, yet it still stung. "The terms of your mortgage remain the same," I explained, maintaining professional composure. "The only change is that I'm no longer personally overseeing the account." "I see." Another pause. Discussions have been difficult since Thanksgiving. Your father feels you deliberately misled us about your involvement in our finances." I pressed my fingertips against my temple, feeling a tension headache forming. "I didn't mislead you, Mom. I helped when you needed it and kept the arrangement private to preserve Dad's dignity. Those are facts, not manipulations. He sees it differently, she responded with the diplomatic evasion that had characterized her approach to family conflict throughout my childhood. Always mediating, never directly challenging my father's perspective, even when it contradicted reality. "And what do you see, Mom?" I asked, suddenly tired of the familiar dance. "Do you also believe I had sinister motives for helping you keep your home?" The silence that followed told me everything. Whatever her private thoughts, my mother would not openly contradict my father's narrative. Her allegiance was clear and unchanging. "We'd like to refinance with another lender," she finally said. "Your father doesn't feel comfortable with our home being connected to the current situation." The current situation. Such a careful euphemism for family breakdown. "That's certainly your right," I replied, professional mask firmly in place. "I can have our loan officer prepare the necessary paperwork. There would be no early termination penalties." "Thank you." Her voice softened fractionally. "Emma, your father needs time. This has been difficult for him to process." I bit back the response that immediately rose to my lips, that his difficulty processing reality didn't justify years of dismissing my achievements or the formal diminishment announced at Thanksgiving dinner. Instead, I simply said, "I understand. The paperwork will be ready whenever you decide on a new lender." After hanging up, I sat motionless at my desk, absorbing what had just occurred. My parents would rather take on less favorable financing, terms with a different lender, than maintain a business relationship with their daughter's firm. The rejection was so complete it bordered on absurd. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Marcus, our loan oversight manager, who had taken over my parents' mortgage file. "Got a minute?" he asked, holding a folder that I immediately recognized as containing my parents' financial documents. "Is there an issue with the Chen file?" I asked, gesturing for him to sit. Marcus opened the folder with obvious discomfort. "I've been reviewing the payment history and current terms. Emma, these accommodations are unusually generous. The interest rate is significantly below market for their risk profile." I maintained a neutral expression. "The terms were approved by the investment committee, based on your recommendation and situational analysis," he reminded me gently. Looking at this with fresh eyes, I can't justify maintaining these terms under standard business practices. The implications were clear. The preferential treatment I'd arranged for my parents wouldn't continue under objective oversight. Their monthly payments would likely increase by several $100s if adjusted to reflect their actual risk profile. "I understand," I said, professional training overriding personal concerns. "You need to make appropriate business decisions based on the file's merits." Marcus seemed relieved by my response. "I'll prepare an adjustment notice. Their rate will remain below typical market given the duration of the existing arrangement, but it will increase to reflect current risk assessment." After he left, I contemplated the ripple effects of my Thanksgiving revelation. Not only had I lost my family connection, but my parents would now face the financial consequences of operating under standard business terms rather than a daughter's protection. The outcome was predictable and logical, yet still carried an emotional weight I hadn't fully anticipated. That evening, I found myself driving through my parents' neighborhood, a spontaneous detour on my way home that surprised even me. The familiar streets were decorated with holiday lights, each home a showcase of seasonal cheer. My parents' house came into view, the tasteful exterior lighting exactly as it had been every December of my childhood. White lights outlining the roofline, a wreath on the door, no colored bulbs or inflatable decorations that my father considered tacky. I slowed as I passed, not entirely sure what I was looking for. A sign of change? A physical manifestation of our family fracture? The house looked exactly as it always had, well-maintained, dignified. revealing nothing of the financial struggles or emotional turmoil within its walls. As I watched, the front door opened and my father emerged to adjust one of the light strands that had come loose. He stood on the porch for a moment, surveying his domain with the assessing eye I remembered from childhood, when he would inspect our homework, our rooms, our appearances with the same critical attention to detail. For a brief moment, I saw him not as the imposing patriarch who had shaped and constrained my choices, but as an aging man clinging to a facade of prosperity while his financial foundation crumbled beneath him. The recognition didn't erase years of emotional harm, but it offered a perspective I hadn't fully embraced before, that his rigid expectations might have stemmed from his own fear of failure as much as from cultural values or personal rigidity. I drove on before he could notice my car, uncertain what I would have done if our eyes had met across the carefully landscaped front yard that had absorbed so many hours of my childhood Saturdays, working alongside him in silent, methodical gardening, sessions that constituted father-daughter time in the Chen household. Christmas approached, my first ever without family celebrations. David invited me to join his extended family gathering in Seattle, an offer I appreciated but ultimately declined. "I need to figure out what my holidays look like now," I explained. "Create new traditions rather than borrowing someone else's." Instead, I volunteered to coordinate the community center's holiday financial workshop, helping families create realistic budgets for the season and plan for the coming year. The practical focus kept me grounded, and the participants' gratitude provided a different kind of emotional fulfillment than family obligation had ever offered. On Christmas Eve, I received an unexpected email from my father, the first direct communication since Thanksgiving. The subject line read simply, "Notice received." The message was brief and formal. "We have received notice of interest rate adjustment on our mortgage effective February 1st. The new rate represents a 2.7% increase from our current terms. I'm contacting you directly as I assume this change was implemented under your authority despite your claimed removal from oversight of our account. No greeting, no acknowledgement of the holiday, just an accusation wrapped in financial details." I considered ignoring the message until after the holiday, but something prompted me to respond immediately. Perhaps it was the opportunity to model the direct communication that had always been lacking in our family dynamic. The rate adjustment was implemented by the oversight manager based on standard risk assessment, I wrote. "I am no longer involved in decisions regarding your mortgage," as I explained to Mom when she called. The transfer of oversight was specifically to ensure business decisions would be made objectively without personal considerations. The original terms were indeed preferential based on my recommendation, which is no longer factored into the assessment. I hesitated before adding, "I hope you and Mom have a peaceful holiday." His response came minutes later. "I've consulted with James about our financial options. We'll be exploring refinancing with his bank, where we can expect professional treatment rather than personal manipulations disguised as business decisions." The accusation stung, but I recognized it for what it was. My father's attempt to reassert control over a narrative that had slipped from his grasp. Rather than acknowledge that he had been receiving preferential treatment due to my intervention, he was recasting the return to standard business practices as deliberate punishment. I didn't respond further. Some conversations couldn't be resolved through reasoned exchange, particularly when one party was committed to a version of reality that preserved their self-image at the expense of factual accuracy. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, sunshine illuminating Portland's winter landscape with unexpected brightness. I woke early, the habit of holiday morning anticipation ingrained despite my conscious decision to approach the day differently. For a moment, disorientation washed over me. No family gathering to prepare for, no carefully selected gifts to transport, no mental preparation for navigating the subtle currents of parental expectations. In the sudden emptiness, I felt an unexpected sense of possibility. This day could be whatever I chose to make it. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. I made coffee and carried it to my small balcony, watching the city slowly come to life on the holiday morning. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Morning, sunshine. Whatever today brings, remember you're not alone unless you want to be. Love you." His message brought tears to my eyes, not from sadness, but from the recognition of what genuine support felt like. Not approval conditional on following prescribed paths, but acceptance of my authentic self with all its complex choices and emotions. As I sipped my coffee, I recalled something my grandmother had told me years ago during one of her rare visits from Taiwan. My father's mother, she had been a formidable woman who had survived Japanese occupation, civil war, and immigration to build a new life she had never fully explained to her American-born grandchildren. "Family is like a forest," she had said in her careful English, watching my father trim the hedges into perfect symmetry. "Some trees grow straight, some twist with the wind. All can be strong in their own way." At the time, I had nodded politely without fully understanding her meaning. Now, warming my hands around my coffee mug on this quiet Christmas morning, I wondered if she had recognized something in me that my parents could not. A different kind of strength that would follow its own path, rather than the one cleared by previous generations. Later that day, I joined a community dinner at the center where I volunteered, sharing a meal with others who found themselves without family gatherings for various reasons: estrangement, distance, loss. Among these strangers becoming friends, I found an unexpected sense of belonging. We exchanged stories rather than expensive gifts, wisdom instead of judgment. An elderly woman named Rosa, who had been attending my financial workshop since they began, patted my hand as we helped clear the tables. "Family is who sees you truly," she said with the certainty of someone who had lived long enough to test this theory. "Sometimes blood, sometimes not. The seeing is what matters." Her words stayed with me as I drove home through neighborhoods, brightened by holiday decorations, past homes where families gathered in configurations both traditional and innovative. I thought about what it meant to be truly seen, not as a reflection of someone else's expectations or as an extension of their identity, but as myself with all my complexity. The new year approached with its familiar symbolism of fresh beginnings. I found myself taking stock in ways that went beyond the financial assessments I conducted for clients. What did I want to preserve from my family heritage? What patterns was I willing to release? How would I define success now that I had definitively stepped outside the narrow parameters my parents had established? These questions had no simple answers, but asking them felt like an act of creation, the beginning of a more authentic chapter shaped by conscious choice rather than inherited assumption. Standing at this crossroads of identity, I understood that the true revelation of Thanksgiving hadn't been about exposing my parents' financial vulnerability or asserting my professional success. It had been about finally acknowledging the price of seeking approval that would always remain conditional. Perhaps the most valuable asset I'd acquired wasn't my partnership at Horizon or the financial security I'd built, but the freedom to define my own worth in terms that reflected my actual values rather than someone else's definition of achievement. That recognition wouldn't mend the family breach or resolve the complicated emotions surrounding it, but it offered a foundation for moving forward with integrity. The kind of solid financial footing I had always helped my clients establish, now applied to the currency of personal identity. As December drew to a close, I sat at my desk drafting the outline for a new workshop series, Financial Independence and Family Dynamics, designed to help others navigate the complex intersection of money and relationship. The project felt like a way to transform my personal struggle into something constructive, a bridge between the family narrative I had inherited and the one I was choosing to write. January arrived with Portland's characteristic gray skies and persistent drizzle, a fitting backdrop for the new landscape I was navigating. I threw myself into developing the Financial Independence and Family Dynamics workshop, finding unexpected catharsis in transforming my personal experience into practical guidance for others. The curriculum took shape around case studies carefully, anonymized but drawn from real situations, including, with appropriate disguises, my own. The first workshop was scheduled for mid-February, giving me time to refine the material and coordinate with the community center for space and resources. Olivia had initially questioned whether developing a new program made business sense given my already full client roster, but ultimately supported my decision after reviewing the content. "This isn't just therapeutic for you," she conceded after reading the draft materials. "It addresses a gap in financial education that traditional advisors ignore, the emotional and relational dimensions of money. It's good business that happens to be personally meaningful." Her pragmatic framing gave me permission to pursue the buy project without justifying it as purely altruistic or entirely self-serving. The reality, like most worthwhile endeavors, existed in the nuanced space between. I hadn't heard from my parents since the terse email exchange about their mortgage rate adjustment, but James kept me updated on their refinancing efforts. Apparently, the interest rates at his bank weren't significantly better than what they now had with Horizon under standard terms. "Dad's pride is running headlong into financial reality," James told me during one of our weekly calls. "The preferential terms you arranged were apparently even more generous than I realized." "The terms reflected my professional assessment," I replied automatically, the defensive response ingrained after years of justifying my financial acumen to my family. James chuckled. "Right, and I'm sure your professional assessment had nothing to do with ensuring they kept the house that represents Dad's definition of success." I couldn't deny the observation. "How are they handling the mortgage situation now?" "Making adjustments. Dad finally agreed to lease part of his warehouse space to offset costs. Actually brought in a logistics consultant to streamline operations. All things you suggested years ago that he dismissed as interference." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. My father was implementing business strategies I'd recommended, while maintaining that I knew nothing about real business. It was a pattern so familiar it had almost become comical, except for the lingering sting of his persistent dismissal. "Mom asks about you, you know," James added after a pause. "Not directly. She'll mention something she saw at the store that Emma might like, or comment that you'd probably know how to handle some financial question. Little acknowledgments that you still exist in her world." I absorbed this information with complicated emotions. But Dad? Still constructing an alternate reality where you manipulated the situation to embarrass him. It's frustrating, but at 68, his capacity for radical perspective shifts might be limited. After we hung up, I found myself considering the intergenerational patterns at play. My father had immigrated to America at 19, determined to create opportunities. His parents couldn't have imagined in post-war Taiwan. His rigid definitions of success and security hadn't emerged in a vacuum. They were survival strategies developed in response to genuine precarity. Understanding this context didn't excuse his behavior, but it helped me view our conflict through a wider lens. What unacknowledged insecurities had driven his need to control his children's paths? What fears lurked beneath his harsh judgments of choices that deviated from his blueprint for security? These reflections informed the workshops I was developing, helping me frame financial strategies not just as technical tools, but as responses to deeper narratives about safety, worth, and belonging. The approach resonated with early test participants, particularly first-generation Americans navigating similar cultural and familial complexities. In late January, Olivia appeared in my office doorway with an expression I'd come to recognize as her significant opportunity face, a combination of excitement and strategic calculation that typically preceded major firm developments. "The Matthews Foundation reached out," she said without preamble. "They're revamping their financial literacy initiative for underserved communities and heard about our community workshops through the grapevine. They want to meet. I set down my pen, giving her my full attention. The Matthews Foundation was one of Portland's most significant philanthropic organizations, with funding capacity that could potentially scale our community work beyond anything I'd imagined. They specifically mentioned your work with immigrant families and women in financial transition, Olivia continued. Apparently, someone from the foundation attended one of your December workshops and was impressed. When's the meeting? Next Thursday. Their director of community initiatives and 2 board members. Olivia leaned against the doorframe, studying my reaction. This could be transformative, Emma. Foundation backing would allow us to develop comprehensive programming, potentially create dedicated positions rather than relying on your volunteer hours. It's exactly the kind of social impact investment you've talked about building. She was right. From Horizon's earliest days, I'd envisioned creating a sustainable model for financial education that could operate alongside our wealth management services, not as a charitable afterthought, but as an integral component of our business ecosystem. I'll prepare a presentation on our current community initiatives and future vision, I said, mind already racing with possibilities. We should emphasize the measurable outcomes from the existing workshops: credit score improvements, debt reduction, metrics, savings increases. Olivia nodded. Also, highlight your new family dynamics curriculum. That's the innovative angle that could set us apart from standard financial literacy programs. The following week flew by in a flurry of preparation. Between client meetings and portfolio reviews, I refined presentation materials and compiled impact data from our community work. The Matthew Foundation meeting represented a potential inflection point for both Horizon's community involvement and my professional trajectory, an opportunity to formalize and expand the work that had become increasingly meaningful in the wake of my family estrangement. The morning of the meeting, I arrived at the office early to review my presentation one final time. As I was making last-minute adjustments to the slides, my assistant appeared at my door. "James Chen is here to see you," she said, her tone conveying appropriate surprise given that my brother rarely visited my office. "He says it's important." I glanced at the clock, 7:45 a.m., nearly an hour before our first official appointments typically began. "Send him in, please." James entered looking uncharacteristically disheveled, his typical surgeon's composure replaced by evident concern. "Sorry to ambush you at work," he said, declining my gesture toward the guest chair. He seemed too agitated to sit. "Dad's in the hospital. Had a minor heart attack yesterday afternoon." The news hit with physical force, momentarily disorienting. "Me? How bad?" "Mild, all things considered. They caught it early, minimal damage. He'll need to make lifestyle changes, but the prognosis is good with proper management." James delivered the medical assessment with professional detachment that didn't quite mask his personal worry. "He's stable, being released later today." I nodded, trying to process the information. "Thank you for letting me know." James shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. During the initial evaluation, they discovered concerning liver enzyme levels. Further testing confirmed early-stage non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's manageable, but requires dietary changes, regular monitoring, and stress reduction." The implications weren't lost on me. Stress reduction, while he's in the middle of business restructuring and mortgage refinancing. Exactly. James ran a hand through his hair. The financial pressure isn't helping his recovery outlook. Mom's trying to hide how worried she is, but she's not sleeping. The medical bills will add another layer of stress, even with insurance. I leaned back in my chair, already anticipating what might be coming. "What are you suggesting, James?" He held my gaze steadily. "Nothing specific. Just thought you should know the full situation. Whatever happened at Thanksgiving doesn't erase 40 years of family ties. I figured you'd want the information, even if you decide to do nothing with it." His careful neutrality was its own kind of message, presenting facts without applying pressure, allowing me space to make my own decision about how to respond. It was a respect for boundaries that our parents had never demonstrated. "Is he accepting visitors?" I asked after a moment. "He is, though he doesn't know I'm here." James glanced at his watch. "I should get back to the hospital. Morning rounds." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "James, thank you for being the bridge when you don't have to be." He nodded once, understanding the multiple layers of my gratitude. Family's complicated. Doesn't mean it's not still family. After he left, I sat motionless at my desk, emotions churning beneath my composed exterior. My father was ill, potentially seriously, and facing financial pressures that could impede his recovery. The timing couldn't have been worse, with the Matthews Foundation meeting just hours away and no clear path for how to respond to this unexpected development. Olivia found me still contemplating the situation 30 minutes later. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I briefly explained my father's health situation, watching her expression shift from concern to careful neutrality. "What are you thinking?" she asked when I finished. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to rush to the hospital. Another part remembers being formally devalued at Thanksgiving dinner and wonders why I should care. Olivia sat across from me, her usual brisk efficiency softening. Those both sound like completely reasonable responses. "The Matthews Foundation meeting is in 3 hours. I've been preparing for weeks. We can reschedule if necessary." I shook my head firmly. No, this opportunity matters, not just to Horizon, but to all the families we could potentially help. My personal situation doesn't take precedence over that. Olivia studied me for a moment. "What do you need right now?" The question was so direct, so free of the layered expectations I'd grown accustomed to navigating that it momentarily stunned me. What did I actually need? Not what should I do according to cultural obligation or professional responsibility, but what would support my well-being in this moment. "I need to compartmentalize until after the foundation meeting," I said finally. "Then I'll figure out how to respond to my father's situation." She nodded, accepting my decision without judgment. "I'll handle final preparations for the presentation. Take an hour if you need to clear your head." I took her suggestion, walking to a nearby park despite the January chill. The leafless trees and dormant flower beds held their own kind of stark beauty, a reminder that periods of apparent lifelessness often concealed vital processes happening below the surface. Perhaps family relationships followed similar patterns. I reflected. Seasons of distance and dormancy didn't necessarily indicate permanent death. By the time I returned to the office, I had achieved sufficient emotional equilibrium to focus on the upcoming meeting. The presentation itself went remarkably well, better than I could have hoped given the morning's revelations. The foundation, representatives were engaged and responsive, particularly to the family dynamics curriculum I'd developed. "This addresses a critical gap in financial education," noted Eleanor Matthews, the foundation's matriarch and board chair. "Technical knowledge is important, but family systems and emotional patterns often determine whether that knowledge can be effectively implemented." Her observation was so aligned with my developing philosophy that it momentarily took me aback. "That's exactly the premise of the new workshop series," I confirmed. "Financial decisions don't happen in a vacuum. They're influenced by family history, cultural context, and relationship dynamics." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Your perspective integrates aspects typically separated in financial education, the practical and the relational. We'd like to explore how the Matthews Foundation might help scale this approach." By the end of the meeting, we had outlined a potential partnership: foundation funding to develop comprehensive curriculum materials, train additional facilitators, and establish a more permanent infrastructure for the community workshops. The opportunity exceeded my most optimistic projections, with potential to impact thousands of families rather than the dozens we currently reached. As Olivia and I debriefed afterward, The euphoria of professional success collided with my lingering concern about my father's health. The contrast felt almost disorienting, a peak career moment juxtaposed against a family medical crisis I hadn't yet determined how to address. "Go," Olivia said simply when I expressed this conflict. "The foundation partnership isn't going anywhere. Your father's situation won't wait." I gathered my things, grateful for her clarity when my own thinking felt muddled by competing obligations. "I'll update you later," I promised, already mentally rehearsing what I might say when I arrived at the hospital. The drive to Providence Medical Center gave me time to consider my approach. What did I hope to accomplish with this visit? Was I seeking reconciliation, offering support, or simply fulfilling a sense of duty? The answer wasn't entirely clear, even to myself. The cardiovascular unit was quiet when I arrived, afternoon visiting hours just beginning. I asked at the nurse's station for Harold Chen's room, half expecting to be told that family-only restrictions were in place, a policy that would raise the uncomfortable question of whether I still qualified as family after Thanksgiving. Instead, the nurse simply pointed me toward room 412. "Just don't tire him out," she advised. "He's doing well, but needs rest." I paused outside my father's room, gathering my composure before knocking softly on the half-open door. My mother's voice called, "Come in," clearly expecting hospital staff rather than a visit from her estranged daughter. Her expression when I entered was a complicated mixture of surprise, relief, and trepidation. "Emma," she said, rising from the chair beside my father's bed, "I didn't expect—" She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. After months of silence, my appearance at the hospital represented an unexpected shift in the established pattern of estrangement. My father lay against the raised hospital bed, looking surprisingly diminished in the standard-issue gown, monitoring equipment creating a technological framework around his usually commanding presence. His eyes widened briefly at the sight of me before his expression settled into careful neutrality. "James told me what happened," I explained, remaining near the doorway rather than approaching the bed. "I wanted to check how you're doing." My mother moved toward me, her relief at seeing me overtaking whatever caution she might have felt about my reception. "It's so good of you to come," she said, reaching for my hand. "Your father's going to be fine, but it was quite a scare." I allowed the contact, noting how much older my mother seemed than when I'd last seen her at Thanksgiving. The intervening months had etched new lines around her eyes, tension visible in the set of her shoulders. My father cleared his throat. "You didn't need to interrupt your workday," he said, his voice lacking its usual authoritative resonance. "I'm sure you have important financial matters to attend to." The familiar dismissiveness might have stung under different circumstances, but the hospital setting transformed it into something almost poignant, a man clinging to established patterns, while medical equipment monitored his compromised heart. "Some things take priority," I replied, deliberately avoiding engagement with his implied criticism. "James mentioned they've found some liver concerns as well?" My mother nodded, returning to her chair with a weary sigh. "The doctor says it's manageable with lifestyle changes, but it's all happening so quickly. One day everything's normal. The next we're discussing medication schedules and dietary restrictions." The vulnerability in her voice contrasted sharply with the carefully maintained facade she had always presented to the world. For perhaps the first time, I saw my mother not primarily as an extension of my father's authority, but as an individual, navigating her own fears and uncertainties. "What can I do to help?" I asked, the question emerging before I had fully formed a strategic approach to this reunion. My father's response was immediate. "We don't need financial assistance, if that's what you're offering." Of course, he would interpret my question through that lens, viewing any offer of support as an implicit criticism of his ability to provide. Even from a hospital bed, his pride remained his defining characteristic. I wasn't necessarily thinking in financial terms, I clarified, though of course the financial dimensions of his situation had been part of my calculation. I meant practical support, things Mom might need help with during your recovery, or coordination with medical providers. My mother shot my father a warning glance before he could produce another defensive response. That's very thoughtful. Emma, the doctors say your father will need to rest for at least 2 weeks before returning to limited work, with the business already under pressure. She trailed off, unwilling to directly acknowledge the precarious financial situation that we all knew existed beneath the surface. The unspoken reality hung in the air between us. My father's business commitments wouldn't pause for his recovery, and the resulting stress could potentially undermine his health improvements. I could help review the business calendar and identify which meetings or decisions are truly essential versus what could be delegated or postponed, I offered, carefully framing the suggestion to avoid triggering my father's defensiveness. Not making decisions for you, just organizing information to make your limited work hours more efficient. My father studied me with an unreadable expression. Why would you want to help after... He didn't complete the sentence, but the reference to Thanksgiving was clear. Because regardless of our differences, I don't want to see you risk your health, I answered honestly. And because Mom shouldn't have to carry everything while you recover. A complex array of emotions crossed his face: pride, stubbornness, and something that might have been grudging appreciation. Before he could respond, a nurse entered to check his vital signs, creating a natural interruption to our tense exchange. My mother used the opportunity to guide me into the hallway. Once outside the room, she squeezed my hand with unexpected intensity. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "Whatever has happened between us, seeing you here means more than you know." Her gratitude felt both genuine and incomplete, acknowledging my presence without addressing the underlying conflicts that had led to our estrangement. It was a beginning, perhaps, but not a resolution. "I meant what I said about helping," I told her. "Not to interfere or take control, but to provide support during Dad's recovery." She nodded, glancing back toward the hospital room. "He won't admit it, but the financial situation has been wearing on him. The business loans, the refinancing challenges, the medical bills now." She sighed heavily. "Your father has always measured himself by his ability to provide security. When that's threatened, it shakes his entire sense of self." Her observation aligned with my own understanding of my father's psychology, though hearing her articulate it so clearly surprised me. Perhaps my mother had always seen the patterns more clearly than she had let on, choosing harmony over confrontation even when it meant accommodating harmful dynamics. "The offer stands," I said. "If you decide you want my help, with business, organization, medical coordination, or anything else, just let me know." As I turned to leave, she caught my arm. "He talks about you sometimes, you know. Comments on news about the financial markets, wondering aloud what you would think. It's his way of keeping you present, even if he can't bring himself to reach out directly." I wasn't sure how to respond to this revelation. Was it meant to soften my perspective toward my father? To suggest that his harsh judgment at Thanksgiving hadn't represented his complete view of me? Whatever her intention, the information added another layer of complexity to an already multifaceted situation. "Take care of yourself too, Mom," I said finally. "You can't support him effectively if you're exhausted." She smiled sadly. Advice I've rarely followed, I'm afraid. As I walked back to my car, I reflected on the brief hospital interaction. No dramatic reconciliation had occurred, no explicit acknowledgement of past wrongs or clear path forward. Yet something had shifted, a crack in the wall of estrangement, a tentative opening that hadn't existed before. What would grow through that opening remained to be seen. I had offered support without expecting recognition or gratitude. A genuine expression of care untethered from the approval-seeking patterns that had characterized my relationship with my parents for decades. That alone represented progress, regardless of how they chose to respond. Driving back toward downtown, I called David to update him on both the foundation meeting and the hospital visit. His steady presence on the other end of the line helped me process the swirl of emotions generated by the day's events. "You're navigating this with remarkable balance," he observed after listening to my account. "Supporting your father's recovery without compromising your boundaries, or expecting the validation he's never been able to give you." His observation helped me recognize what had felt different about the hospital interaction compared to previous family dynamics. For the first time, I had engaged with my parents from a place of genuine choice rather than obligation or hope for approval. I had offered support because I wanted to, not because I needed something from them in return. It feels like a test run for the principles I've been developing for the workshop, I realized aloud. Financial decisions influenced by family dynamics, but not controlled by them. Supporting without enabling. Maintaining connection without sacrificing authenticity. Life imitating curriculum, David suggested with gentle humor. Or maybe it's the other way around. Either way, it's exhausting, I admitted. I have so much emotional energy invested in both the foundation partnership and this family situation. It's hard to hold both simultaneously. Yet you are, he pointed out, with remarkable grace considering the circumstances. His perspective helped me see the day's events not as competing demands, but as complementary aspects of an integrated whole. My professional work informing my personal choices, and my family experiences deepening my professional insights. The potential foundation partnership and my father's health crisis weren't separate challenges, but interconnected opportunities to apply the principles I was developing. This realization didn't eliminate the complexity or emotional weight of the situation, but it offered a framework for moving forward with greater clarity. Whatever came next, with my family relationships or the foundation opportunity, I would approach it from this more integrated perspective, no longer compartmentalizing. My professional expertise and personal experience as my father had always insisted I should. The weeks following my father's heart attack unfolded in a careful dance of boundaries and tentative reconnection. I established a schedule that allowed me to help my mother with practical matters, driving my father to follow-up appointments, organizing his medication schedule, and reviewing business correspondence, without creating the impression that our fundamental relationship had been reset to its previous dynamic. My mother welcomed my assistance with evident relief, though she remained careful not to directly address the Thanksgiving confrontation or the months of estrangement that had followed. Instead, she focused on immediate concerns. My father's reluctance to follow dietary restrictions, his insistence on returning to work before doctors advised, the mounting paperwork from insurance companies and medical providers. "He won't listen to me about the salt," she confided one afternoon as we sorted medical bills at their kitchen table. 40 years of marriage and he still thinks doctor's orders are merely suggestions. I smiled at her rare moment of candor. He's always believed rules apply differently to him. "True for most successful men of his generation," she replied with unexpected insight. "The same stubbornness that built businesses also makes them terrible patients." These small exchanges represented a subtle shift in our relationship. Fleeting. Moments when my mother spoke to me as a fellow adult, rather than as a daughter requiring guidance or correction. Though we carefully avoided more sensitive topics, these glimpses of authentic connection gave me hope that some form of healthier relationship might eventually be possible, at least with her. My father proved more challenging. During my visits, he maintained a formal politeness that never quite thawed into genuine warmth. He would accept my help reviewing business correspondence with a terse "thank you," but deflected any attempt to discuss the financial pressures that had contributed to his health crisis. "The business is stabilizing," he would insist when I gently suggested prioritizing certain decisions over others. "Once this temporary medical situation resolves, everything will return to normal operations." His denial of both business reality and health limitations was concerning but not surprising. My father had built his self-concept around being the unflappable provider, the steady patriarch whose judgment and capability remained beyond question. Acknowledging vulnerability, physical or financial, threatened that carefully constructed identity. Meanwhile, the Matthews Foundation partnership moved forward with unexpected momentum. Our initial meeting had led to a formal proposal, followed by board approval for a substantial grant to develop comprehensive financial literacy materials focused on family dynamics. The Foundation's enthusiasm for the project exceeded my most optimistic projections, with Eleanor Matthews personally championing the initiative. "Your approach addresses a critical gap in financial education," she told me during a follow-up meeting. "Technical knowledge means little if emotional and relational barriers prevent its application. We want to help you scale this work nationally, not just in Portland." The timeline she proposed was ambitious. Curriculum development completed by summer, facilitator training by fall, and pilot programs in 3 additional cities by year-end. The grant would provide necessary resources but also create significant demands on my time and energy, particularly as I balanced professional commitments with ongoing family concerns. Olivia recognized the potential challenge before I voiced it. "We need to discuss capacity," she said during our weekly partner meeting. "Between your client responsibilities, the foundation project, and your family situation, something has to give." She was right, of course. My current schedule wasn't sustainable, racing from client meetings to foundation planning sessions, then to my parents' home to help with medical coordination or business triage. Despite my efforts to maintain clear boundaries, the accumulated demands were taking a toll. "I've been considering stepping back from direct client management," I admitted. "Not completely, but transitioning some relationships to other advisors while I focus on the foundation project and curriculum development." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "It makes business sense. The foundation partnership has potential for broader impact and firm growth than individual client work, especially if we can establish Horizon as a leader in this specialized approach to financial education." Her pragmatic framing helped alleviate the guilt I felt about potentially reducing my client load, a choice my father would undoubtedly view as further evidence of my unreliable approach to business. I had internalized his perspective more deeply than I cared to admit, still hearing his critical voice even as I made sound professional decisions. "We could position it as a strategic specialization rather than a reduction in responsibility," Olivia suggested, intuitively addressing my unspoken concern. "You're not working less. You're focusing your expertise where it creates maximum value." I smiled gratefully, using corporate language to preemptively counter my father's criticism. "Am I that transparent?" she asked with a knowing look, only to someone who's spent a lifetime crafting similar defenses. The conversation with Olivia crystallized something I'd been circling for weeks, the recognition that true independence wasn't just financial, but psychological. Despite establishing professional success and material security, I still measured decisions against my father's presumed judgment, still anticipated his criticism, even when he wasn't present to deliver it. This realization informed my approach to both the foundation curriculum and my evolving relationship with my parents. The financial education materials I was developing increasingly emphasized the emotional dimensions of money management, how family messages shape financial behavior, how approval-seeking can distort decision-making, how guilt and obligation function as currencies in familial exchanges. One afternoon, as I worked on curriculum outlines at my parents' dining table while my mother rested and my father napped, James stopped by to check on our parents. Finding me absorbed in foundation materials, he looked over my shoulder with professional curiosity. "Financial Independence and Family Dynamics," he read from my draft title page. "Interesting concept. Most financial advisors stick to investment strategies and tax planning. Most financial advisors haven't had our family's masterclass in how money functions as control," I replied dryly. James pulled out a chair beside me. "Using the Chen family psychological warfare as curriculum inspiration? Bold move." Transforming adversity into advantage, I corrected. The Matthews Foundation thinks this approach could revolutionize financial education, particularly for families navigating cultural and generational transitions. The Matthews Foundation, James repeated thoughtfully. As in Eleanor Matthews, the philanthropist? I nodded, surprised by his recognition of the name. You know her? Not personally, but the foundation funds several hospital initiatives, including the community clinic where I volunteer monthly. He studied me with new appreciation. This is significant, Emma, beyond just professional success. His acknowledgement, free from the qualifications that typically accompanied parental recognition, meant more than I expected. It's still developing, but yes, it could substantially expand the impact of the community work I've been doing. James glanced toward the stairs, ensuring our parents couldn't overhear. Does Dad know about this partnership? I haven't discussed it with him, given our current tenuous peace. Bringing up financial topics seemed unwise. He should know, James said firmly. Not because you need his approval, but because this kind of achievement deserves recognition, especially from someone who has consistently undervalued your professional path. I appreciated James's perspective, but wasn't convinced. His health is the priority right now. Challenging his worldview can wait until his recovery is further along. James seemed about to argue further when we heard movement upstairs, our father awakening from his afternoon rest. The moment for continued discussion passed, but his suggestion lingered in my thoughts. Was I avoiding sharing my professional achievement with my father out of concern for his health, or to protect myself from his potential dismissal? The question uncomfortably highlighted how my decision-making still orbited around his reactions, whether seeking his approval or evading his criticism. That evening, I mentioned the conversation to David over dinner at his apartment. James thinks I should tell my father about the foundation partnership, I explained between bites of the stir-fry he'd prepared. Claims it's about receiving deserved recognition rather than seeking approval. David considered this as he refilled our water glasses. What's holding you back? Beyond the obvious history of him dismissing my career choices? I set down my fork, appetite momentarily diminished. I'm not sure I want to make my professional achievements part of our fragile rebuilding process. It feels like inviting the same old dynamics back into play. That's valid, David acknowledged. Though I wonder if withholding significant parts of your life maintains a different kind of unhealthy dynamic. One where you're still managing his potential reactions by controlling what information you share. His observation was uncomfortably perceptive. So damned either way. Share my success and risk his dismissal, or withhold it and perpetuate information management as relationship strategy? Or consider a third option, David suggested gently. Share your achievement not to gain his approval or prove your worth, but simply because it's an important part of your life, the way any adult might share significant news with family members. That sounds suspiciously like healthy communication, I noted with a wry smile. Not exactly the Chen family specialty. Maybe it could be, he countered. At least your contribution to the pattern could change, regardless of how they respond. The suggestion stayed with me in the days that followed, influencing my interactions with my parents in subtle ways. I found myself sharing more authentic aspects of my daily life during visits, not just logistical details related to my father's care, but glimpses of my actual experiences and perspectives. When my mother asked about my weekend plans, I mentioned a community workshop I'd be facilitating rather than offering the vague work commitments I might have previously provided. When my father commented on a business news item, I offered my actual professional assessment rather than a carefully modulated response designed to avoid triggering his criticism. These small shifts didn't immediately transform our relationship, but they allowed me to be more present as my authentic self, rather than the performing the dutiful daughter role I had perfected over decades. The change was subtle but significant. Practicing alignment between my internal reality and external presentation, even in this challenging family context. 3 weeks after my father's heart attack, his doctor cleared him for limited return to work, half days only, with strict stress management, protocols, and continued dietary restrictions. The news simultaneously relieved and concerned me. While resuming normal activities would benefit his mental health, I worried that he would immediately overextend himself, undermining his physical recovery. My mother shared this concern, pulling me aside after the doctor's appointment to voice her worry. "He'll be back to 60-hour weeks within days if someone doesn't intervene," she fretted. "But he won't listen to me about pacing himself." Her implicit request for my assistance represented another shift in our relationship dynamic, acknowledging that I might have influence where she felt powerless, recognizing my role not just as dutiful daughter, but as a potential ally in supporting my father's health. "I have an idea," I told her, "but it will require Dad to accept my involvement in a way he might find challenging." She nodded her understanding. At this point, I'm more concerned about his heart than his pride. That evening, I proposed a structured return-to-work plan that would allow my father to resume business activities within medical guidelines while addressing the financial concerns that had contributed to his health crisis. The approach required direct discussion of topics we had carefully avoided during his recovery. "I've prepared an analysis of your current business operations," I explained, placing a neatly organized folder on the living room coffee table. "It identifies essential functions that require your personal attention versus those that could be delegated or postponed." My father regarded the folder with wary skepticism. "I don't recall requesting this analysis." "You didn't," I acknowledged, calmly. "But if you're returning to work next week, having a prioritized approach might help you manage your health while addressing the most critical business needs." He made no move to open the folder. "And you determined these priorities based on what information?" "The correspondence and reports you've been reviewing during your recovery, supplemented by industry research and financial projections." I maintained a professional tone, presenting myself as a consultant rather than a daughter, seeking approval. "The analysis is based on objective metrics, not personal opinion." My mother intervened before he could produce another objection. "Harold, Emma has expertise we need right now. Your health depends on managing stress while still addressing business concerns. At least review what she's prepared." Her direct advocacy surprised both my father and me. Throughout my childhood and adult life, she had typically played mediator rather than taking firm positions, particularly when doing so might challenge my father's authority. This departure from established patterns momentarily disrupted his reflexive resistance. With evident reluctance, he opened the folder and began reviewing the materials I'd prepared. Minutes passed in tense silence as he examined the analysis, his expression offering no clue to his assessment. Finally, he looked up with a question I hadn't anticipated. "How much time did this take you?" Not criticism of the content, not dismissal of my approach, but acknowledgement of the effort invested. A small shift, perhaps, but significant coming, from a man who had rarely recognized my contributions directly. "A few evenings," I replied simply. "I wanted to create something actually useful for your situation." He nodded slowly. "Your analysis of the warehouse leasing option is thorough, more comprehensive than what my operations manager provided." The admission clearly cost him something, each word carefully measured to acknowledge value without conceding too much. Ground. For a man whose identity was built around business acumen, recognizing my professional competence represented a meaningful concession. "I have additional thoughts on the importing logistics if you're interested," I offered, careful not to overplay this moment of tentative connection. "But it can wait until you've had time to review the current materials." This measured approach, presenting information without insisting on immediate action or demanding recognition, represented my evolving strategy for engagement. Rather than seeking approval or bracing for criticism, I was simply offering my professional expertise as one adult to another. My father set the folder aside with deliberate care. "I'll review it thoroughly tomorrow. Your mother is right that I need to manage stress during this initial return to work." The acknowledgement, however limited, opened space for a different kind of conversation, one where my professional insights weren't automatically dismissed and where my father's business challenges weren't shrouded in protective secrecy. Not reconciliation exactly, but a tentative step toward more authentic exchange. As I gathered my things to leave that evening, my mother walked me to the door with unusual decisiveness in her step. "Whatever you included in that folder," she said quietly, "it's the first business material he's engaged with seriously since the heart attack. Thank you for finding a way to reach him." Her gratitude was genuine but also revealing, highlighting how she had come to view me as someone with unique capacity to navigate my father's defenses. This represented both opportunity and risk, the chance to establish healthier communication patterns, but also the potential to be drawn back into dysfunctional family dynamics. Driving home through Portland's evening traffic, I contemplated this delicate balance. Supporting my father's recovery without sacrificing my own boundaries required constant vigilance, assessing each interaction not just for its immediate outcome, but for its longer-term implications for our relationship patterns. This mindfulness extended to my professional decisions as well. As the Matthews Foundation partnership progressed, I found myself applying the same principles of healthy engagement, contributing expertise without seeking validation, maintaining boundaries while remaining genuinely engaged, recognizing when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. Eleanor Matthews noticed this integration during a curriculum development session in early March. "You embody the principles you're teaching," she observed as we reviewed materials addressing family financial dynamics. "There's an authenticity to your approach that can't be manufactured." Her comment caught me off guard. "What makes you say that?" "The way you discuss emotional patterns around money has the weight of lived experience," she explained. "Many financial educators understand the technical aspects, but miss the psychological dimensions entirely. Your material addresses both with equal depth." I hesitated, uncertain how much of my personal context to reveal. My family background has certainly informed my perspective on how money functions in relationships. Eleanor smiled knowingly. "As does everyone's. The difference is your willingness to examine those patterns critically, rather than simply replicating them." Her observation paralleled what I was discovering through my evolving interactions with my parents, that awareness of destructive patterns was necessary but insufficient for change. The critical step was establishing new behaviors even when familiar dynamics exerted their gravitational pull. 2 days after presenting my father with the business analysis, I received an unexpected email from him, the first direct communication he had initiated since his hospitalization. The message was brief and characteristically formal. "Your assessment of the warehouse leasing option identified tax advantages my accountant overlooked. Implementation proceeding based on your recommendation. Analysis of importing logistics. Would be useful when convenient for you. No greeting, no personal content, certainly no apology for past dismissals or acknowledgement of our complex history." Yet the message represented significant movement, recognition of my professional competence in an area he had long positioned as beyond my understanding or capability. I showed the email to David that evening as we prepared dinner together in my kitchen, a domestic routine that had become increasingly frequent as our relationship deepened. His reaction surprised me. "This is actually huge," he said, returning my phone after reading the message. "He's not just acknowledging your help, he's actively seeking more input. From what you've described of your history, that's revolutionary." I sliced vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. "It's a business inquiry, not a relationship breakthrough. He hasn't addressed anything that happened at Thanksgiving or the years of dismissing my career." "True," David acknowledged, stirring the pasta sauce. But people often change behavior before they can articulate that change, especially someone like your father, who's built his identity around being authoritative and self-sufficient. The observation gave me pause. Was I expecting too much too soon? Demanding explicit acknowledgement of past patterns when changed behavior might be the most my father could initially offer? The possibility wasn't entirely satisfying, but offered a framework for interpreting interactions that avoided both naive optimism and rigid pessimism. I responded to my father's email with professional courtesy, providing additional analysis of the importing logistics without emotional commentary. His reply came the next day. Another brief acknowledgement of the material's usefulness with a follow-up question about international shipping regulations that demonstrated he had engaged seriously with my recommendations. This tentative professional exchange established a new channel of communication, one where my expertise was provisionally recognized and where interaction could occur without triggering the parent-child dynamics that had previously defined our relationship. Not the emotional reconciliation part of me still craved, but perhaps a necessary intermediate step. My mother, ever attuned to subtle shifts in family weather, noticed the change immediately. "Your father mentioned you've been helping with some business strategy," she commented during my next visit. "Said your importing suggestions might save considerable costs." The casual mention disguised what we both recognized as significant development. "Just applying standard industry analysis," I replied, matching her deliberately understated tone. "His situation has specific advantages he wasn't fully leveraging." She smiled knowingly. "He spent an hour on the phone with his operations manager implementing your recommendations. I haven't seen him that engaged since before his heart attack." The information pleased me more than I wanted to admit. Despite years of dismissal and recent estrangement, I still found satisfaction in my father's recognition, a response I noted with both compassion for its human normalcy and caution for its potential to pull me back into unhealthy approval-seeking. "How's he managing the reduced schedule?" I asked, steering the conversation toward practical concerns. "Actually limiting himself to half-days?" My mother's expression conveyed rueful acceptance. "Officially, yes. Unofficially, he's working from home beyond the agreed hours. But he's at least attempting to follow medical advice, which is more compliance than I expected." This represented my father's version of compromise, maintaining the appearance of following guidelines while quietly circumventing their intent. In previous years, I might have found this pattern infuriating. Now, with greater psychological distance, I could recognize it as the complex intersection of genuine effort and ingrained behavior, exactly the territory the financial curriculum addressed when discussing how deeply embedded patterns resist even the most logical modifications. "Progress, not perfection," I offered, quoting a phrase I often used with workshop participants struggling to change entrenched financial habits. "Small, consistent changes matter more than dramatic temporary ones." My mother glanced at me with unexpected perceptiveness. "Is that from your financial workshops, the ones the Matthews Foundation is supporting?" The question revealed that she knew more about my professional developments than I had directly shared, information likely obtained through James, who had maintained his role as family bridge builder throughout these complicated months. "Yes," I acknowledged, deciding transparency served better than evasion. "It's a principle that applies to most behavioral changes, financial or otherwise." She nodded thoughtfully. "The foundation partnership sounds significant. James mentioned it's allowing you to expand your community work considerably." This opening created the opportunity James had advocated for, sharing my professional achievement in a context where it might be recognized rather than diminished. Still, caution born from decades of conditional approval made me hesitate. "It's an exciting development," I confirmed simply. "The foundation is providing resources to develop more comprehensive financial education materials, particularly addressing how family dynamics impact financial behavior." "That sounds like important work," my mother said, her tone conveying genuine interest rather than the polite acknowledgement I might have expected. "Will you be teaching these new programs yourself?" The question suggested a level of engagement with my actual professional activities that had rarely characterized our previous exchanges. Typically, my parents had addressed my career in abstract terms, general assessments of financial advising as a field, rather than specific interest in my particular work. "Initially, yes," I explained, allowing myself to share authentic enthusiasm. "I'll develop and pilot the curriculum, then train additional facilitators as we expand to other locations. The foundation envisions eventually implementing programs nationally if the Portland pilot demonstrates strong results." My mother listened attentively, asking thoughtful follow-up questions about curriculum content and implementation timelines. Her interest seemed genuine rather than performative, a curiosity about my professional life that transcended the approval-contingent attention of previous years. As our conversation continued, I found myself sharing details of the project I wouldn't have previously thought would interest her. The research supporting our approach, the communities we hoped to serve, the metrics we would use to evaluate success. Her engagement remained consistent throughout, suggesting this wasn't merely polite accommodation but authentic interest. "You should tell your father about this partnership," she said as our conversation wound down. "He may not show it the way you'd hope, but he would be interested, especially in the business structure aspects." Her suggestion echoed James's earlier encouragement, but with important additional context. The recognition that my father's response might not provide the validation I deserved, coupled with the perspective that sharing my achievement had value, regardless of his reaction. This nuanced view represented significant evolution in my mother's approach to family dynamics. "I'll consider it," I replied, neither committing to nor rejecting the suggestion, "when the timing seems right." The exchange left me contemplating how my relationship with my mother might evolve independently of the more complicated dynamics with my father. For most of my life, I had viewed my parents as a unified front, my mother amplifying or occasionally softening my father's judgments, but fundamentally aligned with his perspective and priorities. These recent interactions suggested more complexity and potential for independent connection than I had previously recognized. My mother was emerging as an individual with distinct perspectives and capabilities, not merely an extension of my father's authority. This recognition offered possibility for a relationship that wasn't defined primarily by my father's expectations or my resistance to them. A significant shift in family pattern that paralleled the very principles I was developing for the financial education curriculum. April arrived with Portland's characteristic spring showers and unexpected bursts of sunshine, a fitting metaphor for the uneven progress in my family relationships. My father had returned to work on a modified schedule, implementing several of my business recommendations while maintaining careful boundaries around our personal history. Our interactions remained primarily professional, focused on practical matters, rather than addressing the Thanksgiving confrontation or years of dismissal that had preceded it. My relationship with my mother continued to evolve more noticeably. She had begun asking about my workshops with genuine interest, even requesting materials she could share with friends from her community center who struggled with financial literacy. This engagement represented significant change from her previous polite disinterest in my career, a shift I welcomed while remaining mindful of old patterns that might reassert themselves. The Matthews Foundation partnership had progressed rapidly, with curriculum development nearing completion and preparations underway for the first facilitator training sessions. Eleanor Matthews had become not just a professional contact, but a valued mentor, offering insights from her decades of philanthropy work that informed both the program development and my approach to organizational leadership. The financial education field tends to focus exclusively on knowledge transfer, she observed during one of our planning meetings. Your integration of emotional patterns and family dynamics addresses why people struggle to implement information they already possess. Her validation of my approach meant more than professional recognition. It affirmed the value of perspectives I had developed partly through navigating my own complicated family relationship with money. The curriculum had become a form of alchemy, transforming difficult personal experiences into resources that could benefit others facing similar challenges. As the initial program launch approached, I faced a decision about invitations to the opening event. The foundation had planned a formal reception to announce the partnership and introduce the curriculum to community leaders and potential implementation partners. The question wasn't whether to invite my parents. Professional courtesy and the ongoing tentative reconciliation process made that necessary, but how to frame their potential attendance. David offered his perspective as we discussed the situation one evening. Invite them as you would any other family members of someone being professionally recognized, he suggested. Not with special fanfare or particular expectations, just a straightforward inclusion. That approach assumes a normal family dynamic, I pointed out. Our history is considerably more complicated. All the more reason to proceed as if it weren't, he countered. Acting from your center, rather than in reaction to anticipated responses. His advice aligned with principles I'd been developing both professionally and personally, focusing on authentic self-expression rather than managing others' potential reactions. With this framework, I extended a simple invitation during my next visit to my parents' home. The Matthews Foundation is hosting a reception next Thursday to introduce our financial education partnership, I mentioned as we finished dinner. Meal I had begun sharing with my parents weekly as part of our careful rebuilding process. I'd like to invite you both if you're interested. My mother responded immediately. We'd love to attend. Wouldn't we, Harold? My father's reaction was more measured. What exactly does this partnership involve? James mentioned something about a substantial grant. The question was typical of his approach, focusing on quantifiable metrics rather than the program's purpose or my role in developing it. In previous years, I might have interpreted this as diminishment. Now I recognized it as his way of engaging with information, starting with concrete details before moving to broader concepts. The foundation has provided $3.4 million to develop comprehensive financial education materials addressing the intersection of technical knowledge and family dynamics, I explained. The reception marks the official launch of the curriculum and facilitator training program that will eventually extend nationally. My father's eyebrows rose slightly at the grant figure, a reaction I noted with complex emotions. The financial scale clearly registered as significant in his assessment framework, potentially elevating the achievement in ways my descriptions of the program's purpose had not. That's a substantial vote of confidence from a major foundation, he observed, measuring his words carefully. Your firm must have demonstrated compelling expertise to secure funding at that level. Not direct praise of my accomplishment, but acknowledgement of its objective significance, perhaps the most he could currently offer given our history and his own psychological constraints. I accepted it as a small but meaningful shift from his previous dismissal of my career path. The reception starts at 6:30 at the Foundation headquarters downtown, I continued, focusing on practical details rather than seeking additional validation. Business attire. I can send the exact address if you decide to attend. We'll be there, my mother confirmed, her tone conveying both support and a certain pride I hadn't heard directed toward my professional activities before. It sounds like important work. The conversation moved to other topics, but the exchange represented another incremental step in our evolving family dynamic. My achievement acknowledged without my having to justify its validity, their attendance offered without complicated conditions or comparisons to more respectable career paths. The week before the reception brought unexpected developments that tested this fragile progress. During a routine check of my professional email on Sunday evening, I discovered a message from Marcus, our loan oversight manager, regarding my parents' mortgage. Emma, wanted to give you a heads up before official notice goes out. The Chen Mortgage is showing persistent late payments despite multiple accommodation efforts. Per policy, we'll be issuing a formal warning letter this week. Given past sensitivity around this account, thought you should know in advance. I stared at the screen, conflicting reactions competing for primacy. Professional responsibility dictated non-interference. I had deliberately removed myself from oversight precisely to avoid conflicts of interest. Yet family concern immediately raised questions about my parents' financial situation and what this development might indicate. About my father's business recovery. After careful consideration, I drafted a response that maintained appropriate boundaries while acknowledging the complexity. Thanks for the notification, Marcus. I appreciate the courtesy heads up, but confirm no special handling is expected or desired. Standard protocols should apply regardless of my family connection. Setting aside my phone, I contemplated what this development might mean for Thursday's reception. Would my parents receive the warning letter before the event? How might it affect the tentative rebuilding of our relationship? Most importantly, should I mention it proactively or wait for them to raise the issue if they chose? The questions highlighted how financial matters remained inextricably linked with relationship dynamics in my family, even as we attempted to establish healthier patterns. The same entanglement I addressed in the foundation curriculum continued to manifest in my personal experience, a challenging but instructive parallel that informed my work even as it complicated my life. I decided against preemptive discussion of the mortgage situation, recognizing that doing so might reactivate old patterns of financial rescuing and dependency. Instead, I would attend the reception focused on the professional achievement it represented, allowing my parents to manage their financial responsibilities independently as they had insisted was their preference. Thursday evening arrived with uncharacteristic clarity for April in Portland. Rain clouds giving way to unexpected sunshine that cast the city in golden light as I arrived early at the Foundation headquarters. The elegant downtown building had been transformed for the event, with displays highlighting the curriculum components and implementation strategy. Eleanor Matthews greeted me in the reception foyer, elegant in a tailored suit that reflected her position as one of Portland's most significant philanthropists. "The guest of honor arrives," she said warmly. "Ready for your moment?" "As ready as possible," I replied, surveying the space with a mixture of pride and nervousness. Though it still feels surreal to see everything coming together after months of development. "That's the nature of meaningful work," she observed. "It absorbs you so completely during creation that the public unveiling feels almost disconnected from the process." Her insight helped settle my nerves as early attendees began arriving. Community partners, potential implementation sites, foundation board members, and Horizon colleagues gathering in increasing numbers as the reception space filled. Olivia appeared at my side, champagne flute in hand. "The mayor just arrived," she murmured. "And the president of Portland Community College. You've drawn quite the influential crowd." I scanned the room, noting the mix of civic leaders, educational administrators, and financial industry representatives. "The Foundation's reach is impressive." "Don't deflect credit," Olivia chided gently. "They're here because of the program you've developed. Eleanor Matthews has funded numerous initiatives over the years, but I've never seen her personally champion one like this." Before I could respond, I spotted my parents entering the reception area. My mother in a deep blue dress I recognized. From special occasions, my father in his best business suit, both looking somewhat tentative as they surveyed the crowded space. James accompanied them, providing familiar support in the unfamiliar context. I excused myself from Olivia and moved to greet them, conscious of the significance of their presence at an event celebrating the very career path my father had consistently dismissed. "Thank you for coming," I said, genuinely appreciative of the effort this attendance represented, particularly for my father. "It's quite a turnout," my mother observed, her gaze taking in the distinguished crowd. "So many community leaders." James squeezed my shoulder supportively. Did you expect anything less for a groundbreaking program addressing one of the most overlooked aspects of financial health? My father remained silent, his expression revealing discomfort that might have stemmed from multiple sources. The unfamiliar social context, the public validation of a career path he had long criticized, or perhaps the mortgage warning letter I suspected had arrived earlier that week. Whatever the cause, his presence itself represented a concession to new possibilities in our relationship. "Let me introduce you to Eleanor Matthews," I offered, guiding them toward the foundation matriarch who was conversing with the mayor nearby. "She's been instrumental in bringing this program to life." The introduction proceeded more smoothly than I might have anticipated, with Eleanor greeting my parents with genuine warmth. "Your daughter has developed something truly innovative," she told them without preamble. "Financial education that addresses why people struggle to implement knowledge, not just what they need to know." My mother beamed with evident pride, while my father managed a polite acknowledgement that nevertheless revealed surprise at this high-level endorsement. "We're pleased to see her work recognized," he said carefully. "Recognized and substantially funded," Eleanor added with the directness of someone whose philanthropic position allowed candid speech. "The foundation rarely invests at this level in initial programs, but Emma's approach addresses critical gaps in existing financial education models." The explicit validation from someone my father would recognize as a significant community leader seemed to register in ways my own explanations of my work never had. I watched a subtle shift in his expression. Not dramatic transformation, but a perceptible recalibration of assessment. As Eleanor was called away to greet other guests, James deftly guided our parents toward the display area, allowing me to circulate among other attendees. Throughout the evening, I occasionally glimpsed them viewing the curriculum materials. My mother engaged in conversation with several community partners, my father examining the program metrics with the careful attention he typically reserved for business proposals. The formal presentation portion of the evening arrived, with Eleanor introducing the partnership and inviting me to outline the program's approach and objectives. Standing at the podium facing Portland's assembled community leaders, I felt a momentary disconnection from the trajectory my parents had envisioned for me. Medical school, a respectable profession, choices that aligned with their definition of success. Yet, as I described the curriculum's integration of financial knowledge with emotional intelligence and family dynamics, I recognized that my actual path had not rejected their core values but transformed them. The immigrant determination, the emphasis on education, the concern for community well-being, these foundations remained intact, expressed through different means than they had anticipated, but perhaps more authentically aligned with my specific capabilities. From the audience, I caught my mother's encouraging smile and, more surprisingly, my father's attentive focus. Not the approval I had once desperately sought, but perhaps something more sustainable. Recognition of my chosen path's legitimacy on its own terms, rather than in comparison to their prescribed alternatives. After the formal presentation, as guests mingled with renewed energy, I found myself momentarily alone near the curriculum display. My father approached, his expression reflecting the internal calculation I recognized from business negotiations, weighing what needed to be said against what could be left implicit. "The financial projection models for program sustainability are impressively thorough," he observed, indicating the implementation timeline displayed on one panel. "Most nonprofit initiatives neglect realistic operational planning." I accepted this characteristic assessment, focusing on technical aspects rather than emotional or relational dimensions, as his way of engaging with my work through frameworks he understood. Sustainability was a primary consideration, I confirmed. The program needed to demonstrate viability beyond the initial funding period. He nodded, studying the materials with genuine attention rather than performative interest. "Your mother mentioned you developed this curriculum while also helping with my recovery. That level of productivity is noteworthy." Not quite praise, Not exactly personal recognition, but acknowledgement of objective accomplishment. Perhaps the most authentic engagement he could currently offer given our history and his own limitations. I accepted it as a small but significant shift from his previous dismissal. The program development actually helped clarify some approaches to our family situation, I admitted, applying professional principles to personal challenges. My father glanced toward me with an expression I couldn't immediately interpret. Surprise? Perhaps? Or recognition of a connection he hadn't previously considered. Before he could respond, my mother joined us, her social ease providing familiar balance to his more reserved approach. Emma, the community college president, is asking about implementing the program for first-generation college students, she reported. I told her you'd be the one to discuss possibilities. The exchange continued in this vein: practical matters, professional connections, careful navigation of our complicated history without direct confrontation or explicit reconciliation. Not the dramatic resolution part of me had once imagined, but perhaps something more realistic and ultimately more sustainable. Incremental shifts in established patterns, small expansions of what could be acknowledged between us. As the reception wound down, my parents prepared to depart. My mother embraced me with genuine warmth, whispering, "We're so proud of you," in a tone that suggested she at least truly meant it. My father offered a formal handshake that nevertheless lingered a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you for coming," I said simply, neither demanding greater acknowledgement nor diminishing the significance of their attendance. My father nodded once, his expression revealing the complex calculation I recognized from childhood, measuring what could be said against what remained too challenging to articulate. "The program has substantial merit," he finally offered. "Your professional judgment in developing it appears sound." From anyone else, such qualified acknowledgement might have seemed inadequate. From my father, who had dismissed financial advising as glorified gambling and insisted real success required advanced medical or legal credentials, it represented meaningful evolution. Not complete transformation, not the unqualified validation part of me still craved, but movement within the constraints of his capabilities and our shared history. After they departed, James remained briefly, watching them leave with a thoughtful expression. "That went better than I expected," he observed. "Dad actually engaged with the substance of your work rather than dismissing it categorically." "Progress, not perfection," I replied, quoting the workshop principle that had become something of a personal mantra during these months of family rebuilding. "Speaking of progress," James said more quietly, "did you know they received a mortgage warning letter earlier this week? Dad hasn't mentioned it directly, but I saw the notice when I stopped by yesterday." I maintained careful neutrality. "The firm's loan oversight follows standard protocols. I removed myself from any involvement with their account after Thanksgiving." James studied me with the perceptiveness that had made him an excellent diagnostician. That's actually remarkably healthy, maintaining appropriate boundaries instead of either rescuing them or using the situation punitively. His observation highlighted how significantly my approach had evolved since the Thanksgiving confrontation. Initial revelation of my role as their mortgage holder had emerged from accumulated frustration and wounded pride. Now, I could maintain appropriate professional boundaries while allowing them the dignity of managing their own financial challenges. Exactly the balanced approach I advocated in the foundation curriculum. "Financial health isn't just about numbers," I told him, echoing a core principle from the program materials surrounding us. "It's about relationship patterns, communication strategies, and boundary management. Something our family is finally beginning to practice, however imperfectly." As the last guests departed and foundation staff began dismantling the displays, I found myself reflecting on the journey from Thanksgiving confrontation to this evening's tentative new beginning. The mortgage revelation that had seemed so catastrophic in November had ultimately facilitated something necessary: disrupting entrenched patterns that kept us locked in roles that no longer served any of us well. I hadn't planned or anticipated that outcome when the words burst forth at the holiday dinner. The revelation had emerged from accumulated hurt rather than strategic calculation. Yet its consequences, though initially painful, had created space for a different kind of relationship to potentially emerge, one based on adult recognition rather than parent-child dynamics, on authentic engagement rather than performance of prescribed roles. Eleanor Matthews approached as I gathered my materials, her perceptive gaze suggesting she had observed more of the family interactions than I might have realized. Family attendance at professional milestones can be particularly meaningful when your path hasn't aligned with their expectations, she noted with the insight of someone who had likely navigated similar terrain. It's complicated, I acknowledged. Simply. The most worthwhile things generally are, she replied. Your curriculum addresses that complexity directly. How financial decisions exist within relationship contexts, how patterns established in family systems influence adult behaviors. That lived understanding gives the material authenticity that purely technical approaches lack. Her observation captured something I had only recently begun to fully appreciate: that my complicated family history with money had become not just personal baggage to overcome, but professional insight to share. The very experiences that had once seemed like obstacles had transformed into assets when viewed through a different lens. As I left the foundation building and stepped into the clear spring evening, I felt a sense of integration that had previously eluded me. The professional achievement celebrated tonight existed in conversation with my personal history rather than in opposition to it. The ongoing journey with my parents, however incomplete or imperfect, informed my work with clients and workshop, participants navigating their own financial relationships. This recognition didn't eliminate the complexity of our family situation or guarantee sustained progress in rebuilding connections. My father would likely continue measuring success through metrics different from those I valued. My mother would probably maintain certain accommodations that preserved family harmony at the expense of full authenticity. Old patterns wouldn't disappear entirely, merely evolve into hopefully healthier variations. Yet something fundamental had shifted since that Thanksgiving revelation. In exposing the financial reality my father had tried to conceal, both his struggles and my success, I had disrupted the narrative that had constrained all of us. The mortgage had become not just a financial instrument but a symbol of transformation, representing both the old patterns of control and secretiveness and the new possibility of transparency and authentic recognition. As I drove home through Portland's evening traffic, I realized that owning their mortgage had never been about financial leverage, but about catalyzing necessary change. The revelation at Thanksgiving hadn't provided immediate resolution, but had initiated a process, uncomfortable but ultimately valuable, of renegotiating relationship terms that no longer served any of us well. The next morning, I received an unexpected email from my father. Unlike his previous business-focused communications, this message addressed our relationship directly, if still in his characteristically measured terms. Your mother and I appreciated the invitation to last evening's event. The foundation partnership represents significant professional achievement, particularly given the substantial funding allocation and notable community engagement. While our perspectives on career paths have differed, the program's merits are objectively evident. We are adjusting our understanding accordingly. Not an apology for years of dismissal, not explicit acknowledgement of his financial manipulation or my intervention that saved their home, but recognition of objective achievement and, more significantly, willingness to reconsider entrenched perspectives. From a man whose rigidity had defined our family dynamic for decades, this represented remarkable evolution. I showed the message to David that evening as we prepared dinner together, a domestic routine that had become increasingly central to our relationship. His response expressed what I felt, but couldn't quite articulate. He's acknowledging that his assessment framework was incomplete, David observed. That's extraordinary growth for someone his age and with his history. It's not a complete reconciliation, I noted, still protective of expectations that might lead to renewed disappointment. No, David agreed. But it's an authentic beginning, based on who you both actually are, rather than who either of you wished the other would be. That's potentially more sustainable than dramatic gestures that can't be maintained. His perspective helped me appreciate the value of incremental change, when built on genuine shifts rather than performance or obligation. The mortgage revelation at Thanksgiving had broken open what needed to be exposed, not just my parents' financial vulnerability or my professional success, but the patterns of control, secrecy, and conditional approval that had characterized our family's relationship with money and with each other. What followed couldn't erase decades of complicated history or transform entrenched personalities. My father wouldn't suddenly become effusively supportive. My mother wouldn't immediately abandon patterns of accommodation that had structured her marriage. I wouldn't completely release the hurt accumulated through years of having my chosen path dismissed and devalued. Yet authentic engagement had become possible in ways previously unimaginable. The financial transparency forced by the mortgage revelation had created space for more honest relationship dynamics, still evolving, still imperfect, but no longer built on fundamental misrepresentations about either their struggles or my success. As spring progressed, this tentative new beginning continued developing through small, significant interactions. My father began occasionally asking my professional opinion on business matters, not with the deference he might show a doctor or lawyer, but with basic collegial respect previously withheld. My mother shared community center friends' positive experiences with the financial workshop materials. Her pride in my work no longer qualified by comparison to more respectable professions. The mortgage situation stabilized as my father implemented business changes that improved cash flow, allowing payments to return to consistent timing. I maintained appropriate distance from these financial matters, neither rescuing them from consequences nor using the situation to assert control, modeling the healthy boundaries I advocated in the foundation curriculum. This balanced approach represented perhaps the most meaningful transformation since Thanksgiving. The ability to maintain connection without enmeshment, to offer support without enablement, to acknowledge our complicated history without being defined by it. The mortgage that had once symbolized hidden financial manipulation had catalyzed a process of excavating truths not just about money, but about the relationship patterns built around it. As I prepared for the first facilitator training session for the foundation program, I recognized how profoundly this personal journey had informed the curriculum development. The materials addressed not just technical financial knowledge, but the emotional and relational dimensions that often determined whether that knowledge could be effectively implemented. Precisely the territory my family had navigated so imperfectly for decades. The revelation at Thanksgiving hadn't provided immediate resolution, but had initiated necessary disruption of patterns that served none of us well. What followed wasn't the dramatic reconciliation I might once have imagined, but something potentially more valuable. Incremental movement toward authenticity, toward recognition of our actual rather than idealized selves, toward relationship based on reality rather than performance or obligation. Owning their mortgage had never been about financial leverage, but about catalyzing necessary change. The revelation that shocked the Thanksgiving table had ultimately facilitated something more meaningful than continued pretense, the beginning of honest engagement that acknowledged both our differences and our fundamental connection as family, however imperfectly that connection might be expressed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.